Hi, my name is Dane, and today I want to tell you about something I've been working on. The date today is the 27th of March, 2024, and I want to tell you about essentially an app, a platform, a website. It's several things depending on how we look at it that I've been working on for the last couple of months, and maybe it'll become something big, a business perhaps, or an organization. Up to now, I've been calling it Biomap, but I think it'll soon have a new name because it's not just about environmental conservation, although that is an important part of it. It's about a lot more things. So in this video, I want to tell you about a couple of things. So if you don't mind, I'm looking at my notes over here. I want to tell you about the journey that I took in my starting to love mapping software, because this app is about maps essentially. What my initial idea was, and then what I've essentially built so far, what it can do. Then I want to tell you who could use it, what they could use it for, and then we'll finish off by talking about. I'll finish off by telling you about how we might make it financially make sense, financially viable. So where the money will come from and how we'll keep it sustainable and grow it. All right, so I originally started loving mapping software when I worked on CasaBio with David Gwynn Evans. CasaBio was a great project. It had quite great ambition, and we both really believed in it. We worked on it for a long time, and part of it was mapping. A big part of it was really mapping observations of species of plants and animals as people saw them for scientific use primarily, but it did have some other uses as well, but primarily scientific. And when I started working on that, I used a particular mapping software called OpenLayers, which I loved. OpenLayers was so great, and it still is. And I, in that process, started to really enjoy working with that software, seeing things visually on maps, and manipulating maps based on the data that I wanted to show, whether it was like specific points, locations, or whether it was regions, like an area that I could map out, or something else over time, like the changes and movements and things over time. And so, yeah, I started loving building mapping software, especially into the websites that I was making. Now, what I've built so far, I've been calling Biomap. It's essentially a bit of an inspiration from, some of the inspiration comes from CasaBio, but it's quite different. It's much more than that. It's a mapping website or app that anyone can use quite easily to add layers onto a base map, and layers that they're interested in. So the base map it's at the moment using open source software. So the base map comes from OpenStreetMaps. So it's just a nice, like, think Google Maps, but just the raw base map itself. And then on top of that, we stack layers of things that the person who's using the site is very interested in. So initially, the initial thoughts were, let me use, because I already knew that a really good source of observations and environmental data was iNaturalist. So I thought, and I happened to know that the iNaturalist API, which is like the communication tool that you use to speak to the iNaturalist website to get their data, it's open source. So my map, I knew I could make a mapping app that could connect to it and fetch that data and display it. So in other words, you could, right now, what it allows you to do is you can go onto Biomap and say, I would like to search for a particular species like proteas, and you can fill in some parameters like who the person, whose observations do we want to use, which person, for example, and some other parameters. And then you choose the color, and then there we go. That gets added as a layer onto the map, and you can see all of those observations as little colorful dots on your map. And you can stack multiple layers, and then you can add a second layer with a different color and a third layer with another color. And so far, I've only integrated 2 services into the map. And so the original idea was to entirely build this using APIs, that's, like data sources that were freely available on the internet. I knew some would be paid for, so I'd have to figure out a monetary model so that users would be able to use services that do cost money. But The initial plan for this was just to connect with already available APIs and stack them as layers. So anyone could say, I want to see, these plants or these animals, or and not just environmental things. So weather or current affairs. So you might see like boundaries of conflicts, or you might see business things like shipping lanes or flight paths, or anything that you can imagine that has a geographical, you could imagine seeing it on a map. I want to be able to, anyone who uses this in the general public, to be able to just click a few buttons to add that as a layer. So that's what it does so far. Excuse me. And the two layers, the two systems that it works with right now are iNaturalist. You can add layers of plants and animals, and a very simple mapping service. A very simple weather service, which the name I can't remember right now. So you can see like cloud cover over a specific region, or the whole map, even the whole world. And so the initial plan was to make it just a really simple thing that anyone could use to see, contrast between different layers. So you could see flight paths and animals, or, where the wind turbines are and nearby roads, or whatever it was. And I was thinking it would be both for the general public to use and for scientific purposes. And I think I've started to realize that this can be much more. And what I'm going to start focusing on is current affairs. I think as things come up, as things become big and important in the news, people are going to want to see that visually on a map. Think, for example, recently a few years ago, not so long ago, we had the coronavirus, and people wanted to see where is it spreading, which countries are affected more and less, and what's the distribution of the coronavirus. And then after that, we had the war in Ukraine, Russia invading Ukraine, and people wanted to see what are the front lines, where's the conflict happening. And very, very recently, we've had more conflict in the Gaza Strip as Israel and Palestine. And people want to see where are the front lines there, what's happening, where are things happening, where are conflicts occurring. And in the news, there's always things that people want to see. And there's not, that I know of, there's no place people can turn to see this visually mapped, to see. There are some sites that do this. For example, a fantastic one is Our World in Data. Really fantastic site that provides so much data, including great maps and huge amount of information of other kinds. But it's very overwhelming. The general public would not be comfortable using our world in data, because it's just too overwhelming. It's a bit too scientific feeling and too advanced and technical feeling for the average public to feel comfortable using it. So I want this service, this tool, to be for anyone to feel comfortable using it. When they see something on the news, they're going to go, oh, let me go find it on that mapping tool, and let me go see what the lines are, where it's happening, whether it's a weather event or a current affairs or conflict or environmental or whatever it is. So the general public would certainly use it like that, but I think more importantly and more crucially from a sustainability perspective of this organization will be the non-general public, the people who want to use it in more important or more intense ways, and would be willing to pay for it. So I'm thinking, for instance, researchers, they would want to potentially use this as the first step in their research to validate their initial hypotheses for their research, to say, before they get into more advanced software like GIS software. Businesses might want to validate their plans for things like logistics, supply chains, where, of course, this is just initial thoughts about where things could be. They could map it out, not create maps, but they could see where things currently exist, like shipping routes, for example, or flight paths or whatever it is, and make decisions based on that. Conservationists, most importantly, could use this to see where things like poaching is happening, or where certain species, their distribution is, and where governments would also potentially use it to see things like the areas that need a lot of attention within their countries. And another example, disaster relief organizations could use this map to see where they're most needed. And I'll round this off, this initial discussion, with talking about who would be willing to pay for it. I think a lot of those organizations and companies that I just mentioned and institutions, they would be willing to use it based on their features. So I would imagine that the very simple use case of this, the general public wanting to see current affairs on the map, would need to be free or super low cost, so that everyone would know about it. Everyone would be comfortable telling other people to use it, without there being a barrier of cost. But they're only using it in a very basic sense. They're not creating maps with many layers and then saving them. They're rather just observing maps that have been pre-created, popular maps with popular layers that have been set up for a particular thing, for a particular crisis that's happening, for example. Whereas anybody who wants to use more layers and rearrange them and save them, and especially if they're using layers that require a paid for service, because a lot of really good data sources are paid for, then those use cases would all probably be willing to pay for it. It would be a hugely helpful tool, I think, for many businesses and institutions and organizations, for their teams. Obviously, it's quite niche in most organizations and businesses, but for the few people who need it, this could be critical and it could be huge for them. That they wouldn't feel overwhelmed like they might if somebody suggested they use GIS software, for example. So that's the plan. So far, it's just been me building it. I've got an initial proof of concept that works quite nicely, but it's very basic. Very recently, I got saving and loading to work. So, the main layer system is iNaturalist, but you can add a couple of layers of iNaturalist, species of different kinds and different colors, and then save that, and then load it either from your browser, so you can save it into your browser, or you can save it to a simple backend service online that I've set up. So there's a very basic saving and loading system so far, and I think the next step is going to be building out a library of really great examples. Like, for example, the Ukraine crisis, Ukraine war, war to the front lines, or if there's a particular things that are happening in the news right now, it makes sense for me to start making some examples of those things that I can save as demo maps, and then just tell people about it and say, hey, would you like to see this on a map? Have you ever thought about this, and this, and how those two things interact on a map? And that's happening right now in the news. And just send those links on social media and get people excited and interested, and then see where it goes from there. Obviously, at that point, if it starts to get traction, I'll need to bring some other people on board to do this with me. And ultimately, I shouldn't even be the one coding it. I should be telling the world about it and liaising with the interested parties and interested individuals. And then I should have other people building it and maintaining it and running the business. But that's going to be many months or years down the line, depending on how successful this is. Anyway, that's it. I hope you like this intro. I'm sure I'll do many more of these where I tell you how it's going and what's happening next. I look forward to seeing you in the next one. All right. Cheers. Bye.